License and registration, now. That's what the deputy barked at the black woman standing quietly beside her car. What he didn't know. She was a decorated 4-star Army general on a secure call with the Pentagon. What happened next would unravel police departments, launch a federal investigation, and change the law across America. This is the true story of General Veronica Hayes, and how a single act of racial profiling turned into a national reckoning. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the story. General Hayes, verifying identity, initiating briefing, code Echo Delta 5. Her voice was calm, measured, sharp as a blade edge, but the moment the secure satellite line connected and the Pentagon officer's voice came through, Veronica Hayes knew something was wrong, not with the mission, but with the air around her. It had gone still. Too still. The faded gas station with its crooked canopy and chipped red pumps suddenly felt like the wrong place to be having a classified conversation. But options were limited. The signal was dying, and the orders couldn't wait. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple as she stepped just a few feet away from her rental car into the clearing beside the building. The Georgia humidity clung to her like a second skin. Her voice dropped into a whisper as the officer on the other end confirmed her clearance level. Proceeding with secure transmission. Operation Black Lantern mobilization underway in Gulf Sector. Veronica blinked slowly, absorbing the words. She didn't flinch. After 30 years of service, she didn't get rattled. But she was still alert, eyes sweeping the dusty Riverton Station's lot in subtle arcs. A pair of teenage boys smoked by the vending machines. An old man dozed behind a steering wheel. Nothing looked suspicious. Not yet. Still, her fingers tightened around the encrypted device. She was dressed plainly, jeans and olive green windbreaker, her cap pulled low over the tight coils of her hair. Her boots were civilian, dusty, worn, deliberate. Veronica hadn't worn a uniform in public in over a year. It was safer that way, quieter. Let people underestimate her. Let them think she was invisible. But someone was watching. From behind the weathered glass window of Mac's Gas and Grill, Karen Holcomb squinted hard, her mouth curling like she'd bitten into something bitter. "What's she doing, just standing there?" Karen muttered, loud enough for the teenage clerk beside her to hear. "Ain't even pumping gas. That ain't normal." The clerk shrugged. "Probably just making a call." Karen wasn't satisfied. She saw Veronica's skin before she saw her credentials. Saw a black woman in the middle of nowhere, holding a device she didn't understand, and made her decision. She picked up the landline behind the counter and dialed the sheriff's office with practiced calm. "Yeah, this is Karen at Mac's. Got someone real shady outside by the pumps. Black woman. Acting nervous. Might be on something. She's got some kind of device. Looks military. You better check it out." She didn't give her name. She didn't need to. In Riverton, she had long been the unofficial neighborhood watchdog, a title she had never earned but claimed loudly. And across town, 2 deputies heard the call and smirked. "Finally," Deputy Rick Maddox muttered, sliding his sunglasses on. "Let's go wake the town up." Cole Tanner, fresh out of academy training and itching to prove himself, slammed the cruiser door. "Let's make it quick. Maybe she's got something interesting." Maddox laughed as they sped toward the station, siren off, but lights already flickering. The way he saw it, if the woman wasn't guilty of anything yet, she'd give them a reason soon enough. Back in the cracked lot of Mac's Gas and Grill, Veronica was locked into the final phase of her briefing. "Coordinates confirmed," she said into the secure mic. "Asset relocation requires clearance by..." She broke off. Red and blue lights, dust, tires shrieking. 2 patrol cars. Her body moved before her mind could register the scene. She placed the secure phone gently on the hood of her rental. Hands out, palms visible, every motion precise, every breath deliberate. 2 white deputies jumped from their cruiser like cowboys at high noon. One, Maddox, unhooked his holster with a flick. The other, Tanner, tightened his jaw and strode forward like he was born in a movie scene. "Afternoon," Veronica said smoothly, her posture straight, her voice low. "Can I help you with something? License. Registration. Now." Maddox barked. He wasn't asking. She gave a short nod. "Certainly, officer. My identification is in my back pocket." I'm General Veronica Hayes, active duty, traveling under federal clearance. Tanner's lips twitched. General, huh? He sneered. Funny, ain't seen a general at Max in jeans and sneakers before. Veronica reached slowly, deliberately, for her wallet and produced her Department of Defense ID and travel orders, laminated and crisp. She held them out between two fingers, steady as a rock. Maddox grabbed them, scanned them for less than a second, and let out a snort of contempt. He tossed them onto the car's hood. They skidded and fluttered, one sheet catching a gust and landing near the curb. Fake, Maddox said with finality. I assure you, sir, that documentation is real, and this conduct is unlawful. Her voice never rose, but there was steel underneath. Shut it, Tanner growled, stepping closer. You think this is some kind of game? You don't belong here, lady. You're acting shady, and now you're getting smart. A handful of locals had gathered by then, drivers fueling up, passers-by lingering under the awning, phones quietly raised. A man chuckled under his breath. Karen stood smugly at the window, arms folded, vindicated. Veronica's heart beat faster, but not from fear. From a deep, rising sense of injustice so familiar it felt like an old wound reopening. Please contact your supervisor, she said firmly. Right now, you're making a mistake you won't be able to walk back. Turn around, Maddox barked, stepping forward, cuffs in hand. Hands behind your back. Veronica didn't move. Deputy, this is an abuse of power. You resisting? Tanner challenged, already reaching for her wrist. She didn't fight, didn't flinch, but her breath caught as the metal bit into her skin. This is unlawful detainment, she said clearly. I am a general in the United States Army. Maddox chuckled. Yeah, and I'm the damn governor. Keep talking. Her Pentagon phone, still sitting on the hood, picked up every word, still connected, still transmitting. And on the other end in Washington, Major Bryce Ellison sat frozen at his terminal, eyes locked on the audio feed. The sounds were distorted, yelling, scuffling, a woman's voice repeating warnings. Then nothing but static. Back in Riverton, Veronica was shoved onto the curb like contraband. Her hands burned. Her dignity, bruised but intact, remained untouched. Tanner leaned over her, eyes narrow. What's your real name? Who you working for? You have my name, and my orders. She didn't blink. You're 2 seconds from being charged with obstruction, Maddox warned, voice low, eyes darting to the phones in the crowd. Keep playing games. Veronica remained still. She had no intention of giving them a spectacle. But she also wasn't going to break. Not today. The murmurs around her grew louder. The cell phones were recording now, but none of the watchers dared step forward. Not yet. Then, Maddox's radio crackled. Dispatch to Unit 12. Confirm status on female detained at Max Gas. He grabbed his radio. Affirmative. Black female, early 40s, refusing to cooperate. Another pause. Then subject flagged federal. Repeat. Flagged federal. Pentagon requests immediate release. Stand down. Maddox went rigid. Tanner froze mid-step. Veronica looked up slowly, and in the stillness her voice finally returned. You're going to regret this. She didn't say it with anger. She said it like a fact. A prediction. Something she'd already seen happen. Because by the time the SUVs from Fort Clark screamed into the lot 5 minutes later, it was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who'd ever been silenced, disrespected, dismissed. And now, they weren't staying quiet anymore. The silence before impact was worse than the chaos that followed. Deputy Rick Maddox stood frozen, radio still clutched in his gloved hand, but the words from dispatch rang in his head like a courtroom verdict. Subject flagged federal. Pentagon requests immediate release. Stand down. The color drained from his face. Cole Tanner, younger, cockier, slower to grasp the depth of the situation, shifted nervously. You think they're serious? He muttered, glancing toward Veronica, still seated calmly on the curb with handcuff marks blooming red against her wrists. She said nothing. Her expression didn't change. She simply tilted her head toward the horizon. That's when they heard it. Engines. Low, heavy, synchronized like a thundercloud rolling over the asphalt. Tires shrieked as 3 matte black SUVs with military plates cut across the gravel lot like sharks in shallow water. The crowd at the gas station gasped, parting instinctively. Phones rose, whispers sharpened. Someone muttered, "That's federal." The SUV stopped in perfect formation. Doors opened at once. Clean, choreographed, merciless. Out stepped Colonel Stephen Lang, commanding officer of Fort Clark's Rapid Response Intelligence Division. broad-shouldered, silver-starred, not here for pleasantries. His eyes locked onto Veronica before he even shut his door. "General Hayes, are you injured?" His voice cut through the heavy Georgia heat like a blade. Veronica rose slowly, brushing dust from her palms. "Minor abrasions," she replied coolly. "The greater injury was to their careers." Lang didn't smile. He turned immediately toward Maddox and Tanner, flanked by two military police officers now standing squarely between Veronica and the deputies. "You are hereby ordered to stand down," Lang announced, "pending federal investigation. Any further action on your part could constitute obstruction of justice." Maddox opened his mouth. "Colonel, we didn't know who she was." "That's not an excuse," Lang interrupted flatly. "You had everything you needed: identification, credentials, federal orders, but you chose—" He paused, stepped closer. "You chose racism instead." Tanner's voice cracked. She was acting suspicious. Lang stepped forward, nose to nose with the younger deputy. "She was on a call. You saw a black woman with a secure device and decided that made her a threat. That's what you're going to remember every night when this footage plays back on the news." The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even Karen Holcomb had retreated from the window, her arms no longer folded, just limp and hanging like her excuses. Lang turned back to Veronica. "Ma'am, we'll have your phone analyzed for breach. We've already begun encryption lockdown. Command Operations has initiated full investigation protocol. DOJ and JAG are looped in." Veronica nodded once. "Appreciated, Colonel." The MPs guided her into the back of the SUV, not because she was under arrest, but because the world had suddenly become a battlefield, and they were her guard. 20 minutes later, Fort Clark Command Base, a military-grade firewall secured the room. Monitors blinked. Dozens of encrypted channels buzzed with activity. Inside a private office, Veronica sat in a clean uniform, her hair freshly tied back, wrists bandaged with gauze. Across from her, Major Bryce Ellison, the officer who had been on the line during the arrest, looked both relieved and devastated. "We lost signal mid-transmission. I should have triggered the emergency response sooner." "You did what you could," Veronica said quietly. "Still," he said, his jaw tightening, "a general handcuffed in public while relaying Pentagon strategy?" Veronica's silence said what words could not. Colonel Lang entered the room again, this time with a small stack of files. "Ma'am, you should know, cell phone footage has already leaked online. At least 3 separate angles. It's being shared under the title, 'Black Woman General Arrested at Gas Station.'" Veronica's fingers twitched slightly, but her face didn't falter. "They see what I've lived. No spin this time." Lang continued. "Public response is accelerating. We're coordinating with Civil Rights Division and Pentagon Press Office. The governor's office has already requested a briefing. DOJ is assembling a review panel." "And the officers?" she asked. Lang nodded. "Placed on immediate administrative leave. Their personnel files are under federal scrutiny. Prior complaints have emerged. Excessive force, racial profiling, quietly buried until now." Veronica exhaled through her nose. "It's not just about me anymore." "No, ma'am," Lang agreed. "It's about everyone who's ever been written off the moment they stepped out of a car in the wrong zip code." Meanwhile, back in Riverton, the police department scrambled. Chief Greg Garrison, a man who wore his badge like a hunting trophy, stood red-faced before a row of cameras outside the sheriff's office. "We regret the misunderstanding," he said, avoiding the word apology like poison. "The officers involved have been placed on leave while the facts are gathered." Chief Garrison, a young journalist from Atlanta, interjected, "How does someone present official U.S. military ID and still end up in handcuffs?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Were your deputies trained to verify such credentials? Was race a factor in their response?" Garrison blinked behind sweat-slicked glasses. "I can't speculate." "But we all saw the video," the reporter pressed. His silence was its own answer. Online, the outrage had grown. Hashtags like #General Hayes and Riverton profiling trended for hours. Former military leaders, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens alike flooded the internet with messages of support, fury, and disbelief. Back at Fort Clark, Veronica stood at the window of her quarters as the sun dipped behind the trees. Her dress uniform hung ready on the hook beside her. A quiet monument to decades of service, to wars fought, lives saved, commands followed. And yet, None of that had mattered on the cracked pavement of a gas station parking lot. She lifted her phone, scrolling past news alerts and missed calls, photos of her in cuffs, video freeze frames, politicians quoting her military record with sudden reverence. None of it eased the weight in her chest. Veronica wasn't humiliated. She was awakened. Again. Because even after 3 decades of loyalty, leadership, and sacrifice, one moment of bias had reduced her in the eyes of 2 men to just another black woman acting suspicious. She stared at her reflection in the glass and whispered softly to herself, "They didn't just handcuff me, they shackled their own future." And tomorrow, the whole world would hear exactly why. By dawn, Riverton was no longer a forgotten blip on the Georgia map. It was national news. The footage had gone viral overnight. 3 angles, same story. A black woman calmly identifying herself as a U.S. Army general. 2 white deputies cuffing her anyway. Her documents tossed like garbage. Her dignity stripped while she remained composed. The voices of bystanders, some mocking, some whispering, none intervening. But America saw it now. Every frame, every insult, every brutal irony. And what they saw was truth. Veterans, organizations, some of which had long avoided politics, issued blistering statements. "This is not a misunderstanding," one read. "This is an assault on the uniform." Civil rights leaders called for suspensions, investigations, charges. The Pentagon? Already in emergency briefings, and in the heart of Fort Clark, General Veronica Hayes stood still, watching the headlines scroll across her monitor. Decorated Army General, arrested by Georgia deputies while on duty. Veronica Hayes served 5 tours, cuffed in gas station lot for making a call. America salutes General Hayes, but will it protect her? She didn't blink, didn't nod, didn't cry. Her fingers hovered over her dress uniform, laid out like armor. It had been years since she wore it in public, not for lack of pride, but because sometimes the uniform was a target. And yesterday proved it again. A knock tapped lightly at her door. It was Colonel Stephen Lang, arms crossed, eyes softer than the last time they spoke. "Press office has finalized the time. Noon sharp. The whole country will be watching." Veronica turned from the window. "Then let's make sure they don't forget what they see." 11:59 a.m. The gates of Fort Clark. The press conference wasn't just covered, it was saturated. News vans choked the grass along the base perimeter. Boom mics jutted into the air like bayonets. Cameramen barked angles. Reporters rehearsed intros. On the far side of the yellow tape, a gathering crowd had begun to form. Veterans in faded jackets, black families with signs, university students holding cardboard letters that read, "I am Veronica." They weren't there for spectacle. They were there to witness a moment America rarely offered. A black woman in power, speaking not as a victim, but as a storm. When Veronica stepped up to the podium, a hush fell that not even wind dared to cut through. She wore full U.S. Army dress blues, decorated, pressed, gleaming. Every ribbon told a story of valor. Every medal, a sacrifice earned. Her face was composed, but her gaze was sharp enough to cut through concrete. No teleprompter, no rehearsed slogans, no filtered pain, just truth. "My name is General Veronica Hayes," she began. "I have served the United States Army for 30 years. I have commanded battalions in war zones. I have advised presidents. I have worn this uniform not for praise, but to protect the principles etched into our Constitution." A pause. A silence. Her next words dropped like stone on glass. "But yesterday, in Riverton, Georgia, none of that mattered." Reporters scribbled frantically. Flashbulbs popped, but Veronica wasn't looking at them. She was looking past them, at the crowd beyond the barrier, at the veterans clenching their jaws, the young girl on her father's shoulders, the older woman clutching a tissue with shaking hands. I was not judged by the content of my character. I was not acknowledged for my service, my rank, or my sacrifice. I was judged by the color of my skin, and cuffed for daring to speak with authority. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The weight in her tone held the entire field in a stranglehold. "I am not here for an apology," she said. "I am here because silence is not an option. Accountability matters. Human dignity matters. These things are not optional. They are owed." Behind the press corps, the people began to stir, heads nodding, fists tightening. "And let me be very clear," Veronica said, her voice rising just enough to resonate across the open field. "I was not humiliated yesterday. They were, and history will remember it that way." She stepped back. No questions, no spin, just facts. unshakable, irrefutable. Colonel Lang moved protectively to her side, but she didn't need him now. The applause started with a single clap from a disabled veteran near the gate, then another, then dozens more, until the entire crowd surged with sound, not polite, but righteous. Applause that didn't beg for approval. Applause that demanded change. Veronica stood unmoved, but her eyes gleamed, not with tears but with resolve. This moment wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been reduced to less than their truth. Across America, the speech ran on every network. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended in 5 languages. General Hayes, dignity is not optional, they were humiliated. Civil rights attorneys filed formal misconduct charges against the deputies. The Department of Justice opened a full inquiry, and the President of the United States, a former veteran himself, released a statement. We are proud to call Veronica Hayes one of our own. Her strength honors our military, her treatment dishonors our nation's values. In Riverton, Deputy Maddox and Deputy Tanner were suspended indefinitely. Anonymous sources leaked their past infractions. False reports, racial complaints, excessive force, cases swept quietly under the rug. Not this time. And Karen Holcomb, the gas station clerk who made the call? She resigned without comment after protesters showed up outside her business with signs that read, "You didn't see a threat, you saw your own prejudice." Later that night, Fort Clark quarters, Veronica sat alone on her bunk, no cameras, no podium, just quiet. She scrolled through messages, thousands of them. Veterans, young black cadets, mothers, students, strangers. One message stood out. A teenage girl had written, "I saw the way they treated you, and I saw how you stood. Thank you for showing me how to walk with my head up." Veronica exhaled. This wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a spark. And sometimes a spark is all it takes to light a movement. The first formal complaint against Riverton's Sheriff's Department landed at 6-7 a.m. By noon, 37 more had followed, most of them from the past 5 years. Mothers, veterans, teachers, a retired pastor, all of them had stories. Most had stayed silent, until General Veronica Hayes gave them a reason not to. And the Department of Justice? They weren't just investigating now, they were digging. Back at Fort Clark, the room smelled like burnt coffee and adrenaline. Colonel Stephen Lang stood behind a war table stacked with printed complaints, flash drives, and names. So many names. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes told Veronica everything. This wasn't just about 2 bad deputies. This was a system, an infestation. And now, it had nowhere to hide. DOJ wants to know if we'll coordinate internal oversight for a broader regional probe, Lang said. Veronica sat still, her uniform jacket draped over the back of the chair. Her sleeves were rolled up now, military calm over a boiling storm. "I'll do it," she said. Lang blinked. "You sure? I've spent decades keeping soldiers safe from what's outside," she said. "It's time I protect them from what's inside." He nodded. "Then let's clean house." Meanwhile, in Riverton, Sheriff Greg Garrison faced his worst nightmare: federal subpoenas and cameras. He stood outside the small, aging brick sheriff's office, surrounded by microphones he didn't invite and reporters he couldn't escape. "We're cooperating with federal authorities," he mumbled. But a young journalist from Savannah cut through his hollow tone. "Sheriff, did your office suppress complaints against Deputies Maddox and Tanner?" Garrison shifted. "We followed internal procedures." "You mean internal cover-ups?" the reporter snapped. "Sir, did race play a role in General Hayes' detainment?" "I'm not going to speculate, but everyone knew." The silence that followed was louder than any answer he could give. Veronica's war room, Fort Clark. Every hour brought new revelations. They had complaints from 2018, filed, sealed, ignored. A Latino veteran reported being shoved during a traffic stop. Case dismissed without review. An 18-year-old black boy accused of resisting arrest because he asked for a badge number. The pieces formed a picture. Riverton hadn't just arrested a general. They'd arrested the wrong generation of silence. The phone call that changed everything. 3 days after the press conference, Veronica received a call routed through the Pentagon. She expected more formalities, but the voice that came through was quiet, sincere. "General Hayes, this is Deputy Secretary of Defense Reynolds. I wanted to personally ask, would you consider taking lead on a new civilian military task force? Something that investigates systemic misconduct where military members are involved. discrimination, abuse, misidentification. We need someone who understands both battlefield and home front. Veronica paused. It wasn't a title she'd ever wanted. She was a soldier, a strategist, a leader. But now she was something more. She said 3 words, "I accept, sir." Back in Riverton, the collapse begins. The footage hadn't stopped circulating. Now a whistleblower, a former dispatcher, came forward, admitting she had heard Maddox and Tanner mocking the call before they even arrived at the gas station. They called it a joke, she said. Said they were going to check on Miss CIA. They thought it was funny. But no one was laughing anymore. Riverton's mayor announced a full audit of the sheriff's department. Deputy Maddox was formally terminated. Deputy Tanner was charged with unlawful use of force after additional body cam footage surfaced from a 2022 stop. Karen Holcomb, the gas station clerk who made the false report, she was subpoenaed for questioning regarding racially motivated false reporting. Veronica's private moment of reckoning. One night, long after the base had gone quiet, Veronica stood alone on the parade field. Stars blinked overhead. The moon hung still. Her hands were behind her back. Not clenched, just heavy. Carried. Lang approached, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her. "Thought you might be out here." Veronica nodded, not turning. "I served 5 tours," she said quietly. "Gave orders that changed lives. Wrote letters to mothers whose sons never came home. I thought I understood sacrifice." "You do," Lang said gently. "No, I understood military sacrifice," she replied. "But yesterday, I realized something." She finally turned to him. "You can win medals for your country and still be seen as a threat by your countrymen, and no ribbon fixes that." Lang didn't argue. He just stood beside her. A silent salute in the dark. Washington, D.C. 1 week later, Veronica took the stand at a congressional hearing. Cameras rolled, senators whispered, networks streamed every second. She sat, spine straight, eyes unwavering. The chair of the committee spoke first. "General Hayes, thank you for joining us. You've become something of a symbol for many. How do you view your role now?" Veronica didn't hesitate. "I'm not a symbol. I'm a reminder." A pause. "That racism isn't subtle anymore. It's documented. That authority, unchallenged, breeds injustice. And that rank, no matter how earned, doesn't shield you from ignorance." Gasps, scribbles, nods. Veronica continued. "I was cuffed on a curb, not because of what I did, but because of what they assumed I was. And the only reason I'm sitting here today is because someone hit record. How many haven't been so lucky?" The silence was thunder. Outside the Capitol, protesters gathered. Signs held high. "We all deserve Veronica's voice. Human dignity has no rank. Not just a general warning." Back at Fort Clark, as she entered her quarters that night, Veronica saw a note slipped under her door. Handwritten, no name. It read, "You gave us more than a speech. You gave us permission to stop shrinking." She held the note close just for a moment, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her uniform jacket, the one they tried to forget she'd earned. But she'd never let them forget again. The first briefing of the Civil Military Accountability Task Force began not in a polished Capitol boardroom, but in a cold, gray-walled intelligence conference room beneath Fort Clark. No nameplates, no press, just hard truths and harder eyes. At the head of the table, General Veronica Hayes stood in uniform. Her presence alone quieted the room. The seals on the folders in front of her weren't decorative. They were warnings. She looked up. "This isn't about one department, one incident. This is about patterns." The screen behind her flickered to life. A map of the southeastern U.S., glowing with red dots. Each one marked a documented case, military personnel or veterans subjected to unwarranted stops, detainments, or force. "I want you to understand something," she said slowly, tapping a laser pointer over the map. "They thought I was alone that day in Riverton, but I wasn't." Click. Another slide. Grainy dashcam stills. A decorated black Navy officer handcuffed beside his daughter. A Latina Air Force mechanic forced to the ground during a traffic stop. A Marine veteran misidentified and tased during a wellness check. These people served, just like I did, Veronica said, and they were still seen as threats. Silence tightened across the room, but one hand rose. It was Major Malik Rowan, legal analyst for the Pentagon's Internal Compliance Division. "We've received a tip, ma'am," he said carefully. "From inside the next town over, Pine Hill." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Rowan pushed a folder across the table. Anonymous source claims Pine Hill PD has destroyed body cam footage from 3 separate encounters with military personnel in the past year. He paused. And one of those involved a JAG officer from Fort Clark. Later that afternoon, Veronica's private office. She stared at the contents of the file in silence. Name, Captain Simone Cabranche, U.S. Army JAG Corps. Incident date, March 14. Location, Pine Hill, GA. Status, unresolved. Video unavailable, no charges filed. It wasn't just a red flag, it was a smoking flare. According to the report, Captain Kerr had been stopped while in uniform, accused of impersonating military personnel, by a civilian officer who claimed her credentials were too clean to be real. Veronica's jaw clenched. She knew Simone. Bright, fierce, law sharp as a scalpel. One of the few black women to rise so quickly in the JAG ranks. And they'd tried to erase her. She picked up the phone. Lang. I need full jurisdictional clearance to open an inquiry into Pine Hill PD, quietly, for now. Lang didn't hesitate. You'll have it in an hour. Across town, Simone Kerr's apartment. The knock at her door startled her. Simone opened it slowly and froze when she saw the 4 stars on Veronica's lapel. General Hayes, she breathed. I wasn't expecting. You shouldn't have to expect me, Veronica said. You should have had justice the moment you walked off that street. Simone's eyes welled for just a second, but she pushed it down. She was still a soldier. They deleted it, she said. The footage, I filed everything. FOIA requests, internal complaints. Nothing. It was like it never happened. But it did, Veronica said quietly. And now it's going to matter. Simone's shoulders finally sagged. She stepped aside. Come in. Inside Pine Hill PD, unraveling begins. By the next morning, under direct federal order, Veronica's task force arrived at Pine Hill's Records Division with a team of digital forensic experts and legal auditors. They were met with tight smiles and forced cooperation. But computers don't lie. Not for long. What the task force found was worse than expected. Dozens of altered timestamps, missing segments and storage logs, file deletion software traced back to one specific workstation a month. And the person behind that terminal? Sergeant Eric Lyle. He wasn't just a random officer. He was the same man who detained Captain Kerr. Veronica stood outside the records room, holding the printed audit sheet, her eyes narrowing. They deleted it because it showed truth, she said, which means truth is exactly what we're going to find. News breaks. Another town, another firestorm. Word leaked within 24 hours. The story hit the national networks. New. Another Georgia PD accused of covering up misconduct involving military officer. Pine Hill tried damage control, but public trust had already vaporized. Protesters began gathering by noon. The governor issued a statement. The state attorney general launched a parallel investigation, and once again Veronica found herself fielding calls from every major network in America. But this time, when they asked her if she wanted to do another press conference, she said, no. This time, Captain Kerr speaks. The press conference, a new voice, takes the mic. Captain Simone Kerr stepped up to the podium with her uniform crisp, her voice slightly trembling, but growing steadier with every syllable. I was told my ID was fake. I was searched, humiliated, accused of wearing a uniform I've bled to earn, and then they deleted the proof. But I am not a lie. I am not a mistake, and I am not afraid. Behind her, General Hayes stood with arms crossed, not shielding her, backing her. Reporters erupted with questions, but Simone said one last thing before stepping away. I don't need them to apologize. I need them to change. And thanks to General Hayes, they will. That night, Veronica's reflections alone in her quarters, Veronica sat at her desk reading letters. One from a 12-year-old boy whose father was a Marine. One from a retired Tuskegee airman. One from a young cadet at West Point who wrote, I was scared to keep going, but now I want to wear the uniform louder. She looked out the window at the stars again, just like that first night after Riverton. This time she whispered to the dark, they tried to delete our truth, but it survived, in every voice, rising now. The package arrived with no return address. A small, nondescript envelope slid under General Veronica Hayes' office door sometime between midnight and dawn. No markings, no seal. Inside, a single photograph, a grainy still of Veronica walking alone from the Pine Hill press conference, a red X scrawled across her face. No words, no threats. But the message was clear. Colonel Stephen Lang stormed into her office moments later, the photo shaking in his hand. This is intimidation, he snapped. and it won't be ignored. Veronica didn't flinch. Of course it won't. We'll get you a security detail from this moment forward. You don't go anywhere alone. Veronica stood, shoulders squared. I'm not retreating. Let them see that. Lang's voice dropped to a gravelly whisper. They already saw it, General. That's why they're scared. Later that day, Federal Protection Briefing. A full security package was authorized by the Department of Defense within hours. Surveillance logs, vehicle escorts, digital monitoring, the kind usually reserved for cabinet members. Major Malik Rowan met with Veronica in her command room, jaw tight. We traced the envelope drop to an unmarked vehicle near the Fort Clark outer gate, he said. They cut the cameras, knew the angles. This wasn't some basement troll. Then it's working, Veronica replied. Rowan frowned. Ma'am? The truth. It's getting close to the ones who thought they were untouchable. Meanwhile, the ripples of change across the country, military installations began launching their own task forces. Civil-military liaisons were appointed. Community liaisons added to sheriff's offices in states like Virginia, Illinois, and Colorado. A new military bill, informally named the Hayes Act, was being drafted to create a national database of civilian military misconduct cases. In Fort Clark, the flag outside headquarters was lowered for a ceremony honoring service members who had been wrongfully profiled while in uniform. It was the first of its kind. And at the podium, Veronica said only one thing. They thought silence was safety. But now, silence is shame. Behind the scenes, resistance mounts. Not everyone was applauding. Inside certain sheriff departments and law enforcement forums, opposition to the task force grew louder and darker. Veronica's email inbox became a battleground. Messages ranged from quiet admiration to barely veiled threats. Don't forget who keeps this country safe, lady. It's not just you generals. Push too hard and you might just disappear like the rest. If we can't see your stripes, you're just another mouth. The Pentagon's cybersecurity team intercepted and cataloged each message. But the worst wasn't what was written, it was what wasn't. The silence of certain lawmakers, the hesitation from specific departments, the subtle cold shoulders from people who had once shaken her hand with respect. Even in uniform, Veronica felt it, the invisible wall of resentment forming, brick by brick. Personal cost, a letter from her brother. Veronica hadn't spoken to her younger brother David in 2 years. He wasn't military, he worked in a factory in Birmingham. Said she'd changed once she got her first star. Said she forgot who she was. But then, one night, an envelope came. No threats, just a handwritten note. I saw what happened in Riverton. I used to say you forgot where you came from. But I realize now, you never stopped fighting for where we came from. I'm proud of you, big sis. I just never said it before. Veronica folded the letter with trembling hands. It had taken handcuffs and national outrage to rebuild a broken sibling bond. But she'd take it, brick by brick. The call from the White House. When the line lit up, secure line, executive branch, Veronica expected a formal check-in. But what she heard next startled her. General Hayes, the president himself, said, I'm heading to Fort Clark next week. I'd like to meet in person, privately. She paused. Of course, Mr. President. May I ask the occasion? I believe it's time we stop watching history and start writing it. Veronica didn't smile. She never smiled for headlines. But inside, a fire ignited. The breaking point, a sabotage attempt. It happened during a live virtual briefing with 3 other base commanders and DOJ representatives. Mid-transmission, Veronica's screen glitched, then froze. A blaring feedback sound screamed through the speakers. Then static, then black. Seconds later, an anonymous message appeared on the monitor. You don't get to win. Security swarmed. The briefing was shut down. Lang burst into the room, fists clenched. They tried to breach the server through a backdoor access in one of our base's archived military police logs, Lang said. It was planned. Professional. They wanted to scare the people listening to you. Veronica leaned forward. No, she said. They wanted me to shut up, which means it's time I speak louder. A decision is made, going public again. Veronica sat with her team that night, Major Rowan, Colonel Lang, Captain Kerr, and 3 new whistleblowers from other states. I'm holding another press conference, she said. Rowan shook his head. That's dangerous, ma'am. We're getting close to people who don't want their names exposed. That's why we have to do it, Veronica said. Not for drama, for clarity. She looked around the room. This time, we name departments, we name patterns, we name every system that failed those who wore this country's uniform. Lang exhaled. Then let's make it count. As the sun rose over Fort Clark, Veronica prepared for the next battle, not in the shadows but on camera, in front of the nation. Her dress uniform was ready, her medals polished, her voice steady. The forces against her weren't hiding anymore. But neither was she. Fort Clark Press Hall, 11:59 a.m. The energy in the room was volatile, charged like the final seconds before a storm breaks. Rows of cameras waited. Reporters whispered in tight circles, their notebooks already halfway filled with speculation. Military officials lined the back walls, arms crossed, faces unreadable. And in the middle of it all, General Veronica Hayes stood motionless behind the podium. Not a bead of sweat on her brow, not a tremor in her voice. This was no longer just a press conference. This was a reckoning. "I want to speak today not as a general," she began, her voice cutting clean through the murmur, "but as someone who knows what it feels like to wear a uniform and still be treated like a suspect." Click. Flash. Silence. "You've heard my story. Riverton, handcuffs, disrespect, viral footage. But you need to know, that was never the beginning. And it sure as hell won't be the end." Behind her, a large screen flickered on. It displayed a map of the U.S., with 12 cities marked in red. Beneath the map, documented civil military rights violations 6 years. Gasps filled the room. Veronica continued, "These aren't isolated incidents. These are systemic failures, enabled by silence, protected by paperwork, and fueled by prejudice." She clicked a remote. The screen shifted to a list of law enforcement departments, including Riverton County Sheriff's Office, GA, Pine Hill Police Department, GA, Marlow Parish Enforcement Unit, LA, Garrison City Municipal Police, TX, Carson Ridge Department of Public Safety, NC. Each had corresponding redacted footage, blurred faces, and timestamps. But one video played in full. Captain Simone Kerr, in uniform, hands raised, being shoved against her own vehicle as she calmly explained her identity. Veronica turned back to the crowd. "They deleted this footage. We recovered it. They erased names. We subpoenaed them. They hoped we'd move on. We moved deeper." A hand shot up in the crowd. "General Hayes, are you suggesting a coordinated cover-up across multiple states?" "I'm not suggesting," she said. "I'm confirming." Reporters surged with questions, but Veronica raised one hand and quieted the room again. "Let me be clear. This is not about hating police. It's about demanding the police honor the people they're sworn to protect. When that protection is conditional, based on skin, gender, uniform, or zip code, that's not public safety. That's injustice in disguise." Fallout, within hours. Clips from the press conference hit social media in seconds. By 2 p.m., hashtags were trending in 20 cities. Hayes expose, name every department, uniforms deserve respect. The footage of Simone Kerr went viral again, this time uncensored, raw, and damning. News anchors spoke with rare unity. "This is the kind of press conference you remember decades from now." She named names, she gave proof, she demanded change. But the pushback was immediate. That same evening, a segment ran on a fringe network with a different angle. "General Hayes is dividing this country, politicizing the badge, weakening morale." A former sheriff's deputy went on record saying, "People like her are dangerous. They use their uniform to push a narrative." But the voices defending Veronica roared louder. Veterans organizations, civil rights groups, military families, even Gold Star mothers began speaking out, one saying, "My son died in uniform. If he had lived, he deserved a country that wouldn't second-guess his worth based on his skin." Meanwhile, the federal response. At the DOJ, the Civil Rights Division accelerated its investigation. A joint Senate subcommittee was formed to oversee civil-military interactions at the local level. New legislation was drafted in record time, calling for mandatory civil-military bias training in all police academies, real-time verification databases for military credentials, federal oversight for departments with repeated complaints. And it wasn't called the Hayes Bill anymore. It had a new name now, the Respect Act. Veronica's private reaction that night, long after the lights of Fort Clark dimmed, Veronica stood in her quarters reading messages sent to her private line. One from a Marine's daughter, "I used to think being invisible was safer. You made me want to be seen." One from an old commanding officer, "You led troops across continents, but this is your greatest command." And then one, anonymous, unsigned. You didn't speak for yourself. You spoke for ghosts, for every uniform that got mistaken for a threat. Thank you. She didn't cry, but she sat down, placed the note gently on her desk, and whispered, "This is what justice feels like." Back in Riverton, a quiet storm brewed. With federal oversight now descending, the sheriff's office faced a reckoning of its own. Deputy Maddox was officially indicted on 2 charges: falsifying a field report, unlawful detainment of a federal officer. Deputy Tanner resigned quietly, but an investigation into past conduct followed him to his next county. Sheriff Grady? Facing calls to step down, investigators found he deliberately ignored past complaints about Maddox. Karen Holcomb, the gas station clerk? Now the subject of a civil lawsuit for racially motivated false reporting. Riverton's once quiet corners echoed with protest chants. This is our town, too. Protect doesn't mean profile. Veronica's final words, before the Senate. The next week, she appeared before Congress once more. Her last statement echoed across the chamber. You don't get to wear the flag and ignore what it stands for. You don't get to honor veterans on holidays, then humiliate them on side streets. You don't get to choose who dignity applies to. America is not made weaker when we expose injustice, it's made braver. And with that, General Veronica Hayes stepped away from the microphone. One final time, it was supposed to pass easily. The Respect Act, born from fire and clarity, backed by generals, civil rights leaders, and bipartisan polling, had already cleared subcommittees in record time. It proposed 3 core mandates. 1. Federal tracking of civil military rights violations. 2. Real-time verification tools for military credentials. 3. Mandatory civil rights training for all law enforcement engaging with active duty personnel or veterans. 3 simple reforms. 3 long overdue protections. But when the bill hit the full Senate floor, something changed. A wall rose. Quiet, coordinated, vicious. On national television, Senator Roland Ames of South Carolina, a decorated veteran himself, took the podium. We must not legislate law enforcement into fear, he declared, voice full of thunder and hypocrisy. This bill will make every police officer second-guess themselves at every stop. It is political theater disguised as protection. Gasps. Applause from certain corners. And beneath it, something deeper, a crack in the alliance. Ames wasn't just opposing the bill. He was weaponizing patriotism to stall progress. Across the country, the headlines shifted tone. Is the Respect Act too far too fast? Senators split over Hayes' push for civil military oversight. The backlash gained traction, fueled by anonymous law enforcement coalitions and pundits spinning Veronica's movement into an anti-police crusade. She wants us in handcuffs while criminals run free, one sheriff claimed on a syndicated talk show. If a general can't handle a little misunderstanding, maybe she shouldn't be giving orders. Veronica watched these statements unfold with calm intensity, but she wasn't surprised. Opposition was never about truth. It was about control. Fort Clark, briefing room. Colonel Lang slammed the morning paper on the table. They're turning your mission into a circus, General. They don't fear the law, Veronica replied, folding her arms. They fear losing the power to ignore it. Major Rowan paced the room. Ames is rallying 5 more senators. The Respect Act could be dead by Friday unless something shifts. Captain Simone Kerr spoke up quietly from the corner. We need to testify again. Rowan looked doubtful. We've already done that. No, Kerr said, not with her. The room turned to Veronica. Lang shook his head. They're already trying to tear you down. Another appearance gives them a target. Then let them fire, Veronica said. I won't flinch. Veronica returns to the Capitol. This time, the hearing wasn't procedural. It was combat. Veronica walked into the Senate chamber with her 4-star uniform ironed like armor, her shoes polished like mirrors, and her spine straight as a flagpole. Cameras lined every wall. Protesters outside chanted both for and against the bill. Inside, Senator Ames sat at the center of the opposition, jaw clenched, eyes cold. General Hayes, he began, you've become the face of a bill that some believe goes too far. Are you saying law enforcement cannot be trusted to do their jobs? Veronica didn't blink. She leaned forward, voice low and lethal. I'm saying no one should be trusted without accountability, not even me. Ames chuckled. So now we're to assume every interaction is racially biased? No, Veronica said. But when bias kills trust and we do nothing about it, we are complicit. The turning point. The chamber hushed. Veronica paused, then turned to face every senator directly. You praise our service, you fund our deployments, you applaud when we come home, but when we're stopped, questioned, cuffed in your districts, you say nothing. You talk about unity, but unity without truth is just decorated silence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph, the one of her being handcuffed in Riverton. She held it up. I earned every bar on this uniform. But that day, this country saw me the way those officers did. Not as a general, but as a problem to be restrained. Gasps echoed across the chamber. You say this bill goes too far. I say it doesn't go far enough. Because dignity isn't a gift, it's a right. And if we don't protect it for the uniformed, how can we ever claim we'll protect it for the unseen? Aftermath. America reacts. The hearing footage exploded across media platforms. Clips of Veronica's speech were replayed on every major network. Social media dubbed it the moment that broke the chamber. Veterans posted pictures in support, holding signs that said, I stand with Hayes, sharing their own stories of disrespect in uniform. Even former political rivals came forward in support. Senator Kamari Price of Colorado said, that was not a hearing, that was history. The pressure grew too loud to ignore. Within 48 hours, 3 senators flipped their vote. By Thursday night, the Respect Act was back on track. By Friday morning, it passed. Later that day, Veronica's quiet moment. She didn't attend the celebration. There were no victory laps. Instead, she stood quietly at the memorial wall inside Fort Clark, the one etched with the names of soldiers who had fallen in combat. She whispered to the marble, we honored you with silence. Now we honor you with truth. Behind her, a junior officer approached with tears in her eyes. Ma'am, she said, I didn't think I'd stay in the military after this year. But you made me believe we could still fight for what's right. Veronica nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. We all serve. Some just didn't know what they were really fighting until now. 3 days after the Respect Act passed, General Veronica Hayes received an urgent message. Immediate inquiry opened into your service conduct. Allegations of misuse of authority pending. Response required within 48 hours. She stared at the screen. No signature, no explanation, just a seal from the Office of Military Ethics. And just like that, the game had changed. Fort Clark, Situation Room. Colonel Stephen Lang read the notice twice, then a third time. Then crumpled it. They're coming after you through the back door, he growled. You pushed too hard, too fast, and now they're digging for anything to shut you down. Major Malik Rowan had already pulled the files. It's vague, but deliberate. The timing's not coincidence. Veronica didn't flinch. Let them investigate. Lang looked up. Veronica, this isn't a review. It's a takedown in slow motion. They can't beat you in public, so they're trying to drown you in procedure. Rowan set down a folder gently. And there's something else, ma'am. A name? Buried deep in the attached complaint file. Veronica raised an eyebrow. Whose? Rowan hesitated. Brigadier General Charles Harrington. She froze. That name hadn't crossed her ears in a decade. The man had once commanded a joint overseas mission. Her first long deployment, her first real battle, and the first man who ever tried to bury her. Flashback. Baghdad, 2010. Back then, Hayes was a rising major, brilliant, efficient, and respected by the enlisted. But not by Harrington. He'd tried to block her promotion, falsified 2 reports, made sure she never got the commendation she'd earned after diffusing a tribal conflict that could have turned deadly. She had no proof, only suspicion, and a trail that disappeared behind redacted reports and polite lies. She moved forward anyway, climbed, earned every stripe, and now he was back. Rowan's intel, the past resurfaces. We traced Harrington's re-entry into active advisory, Rowan said. He's been quietly consulting for the National Security Oversight Committee, the same committee that tried to kill the Respect Act. Lang's voice was cold steel. So this isn't just about your career, it's about revenge. Veronica's jaw tightened. They want to break the movement by breaking its face. She paused. Then softer. I didn't climb this far to be dragged down by a ghost. A knock at her door. That evening, as darkness cloaked the base, another knock echoed against her quarters. She opened it and blinked. A tall, lean man in civilian clothes stood there, holding a brown envelope. His eyes were familiar, deep, watchful. Veronica Hayes, he said, not quite smiling. It's been a while. She narrowed her gaze. Colonel Julian Baines, you're a long way from Kabul. Julian stepped inside, handed her the envelope. Thought you might want to see what they buried. She opened it. Inside, copies of old mission logs, private messages, internal memos. Proof that Harrington had not only lied during that 2010 mission, but attempted to pin blame for a failed op on her. She read in silence. They planned to keep this hidden forever, Julian said. But someone inside the archive room owed me a favor. Veronica looked up. Why now? Julian's answer was simple. Because this isn't just your fight anymore. You woke the nation. You deserve to finish what you started. The evidence is delivered. The next morning, Veronica walked into the Office of Military Ethics without a legal team, without a press escort, just a single folder. Inside, the truth. She set it down, looked the lead investigator in the eye, and said, "Before you consider investigating me, consider what you chose to ignore." The hearing room 3 hours later, an emergency internal panel was called. In front of 5 military ethics officers and 1 civilian watchdog, Veronica made her case. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She just told the story, mission by mission, fact by fact, how she earned trust in Afghanistan, how she averted an international incident in Istanbul, and how men like Charles Harrington had tried, time and again, to silence women like her behind bureaucratic curtains. Then she slid the evidence across the table. "Prove me wrong," she said. They couldn't. Backlash turned around. The ethics inquiry was closed in 24 hours, and the panel released a statement the next day. General Hayes' record remains untarnished. Her service reflects the highest standards of military integrity. Charles Harrington? Forced to resign from all active advisory roles, stripped of pending commendations, his name now associated with retaliation, not valor. Nation reacts. Again, the headlines returned. Hayes vindicated. Again, the system tried to break her. She broke it first. Resilience has a name, General Veronica Hayes. Veronica's quiet reflection. That night, she stood alone in the Fort Clark Chapel, where names of the fallen echoed in etched glass. She whispered, "They threw shadows, we responded with light." As she turned to leave, she found a small card tucked into the pew behind her. A child's handwriting. It read, "My daddy says you're the bravest person in the world. I think he's right." Veronica closed her eyes. Sometimes battles weren't fought with bullets or words. Sometimes they were won with a single name that refused to disappear. The parade ground at Fort Clark had never been this full. Thousands gathered, service members, families, students, veterans, civil rights leaders, and journalists from across the country. Rows of American flags framed the scene, fluttering in solemn rhythm beneath a sky that refused to rain. In the center stood a single podium, wrapped in dark oak. And behind it, General Veronica Hayes, dressed in full ceremonial uniform for the final time. She took a long breath before speaking, not because she was nervous, but because she understood the weight of this moment, not just for her, but for everyone who never got the chance to speak at all. 32 years ago, I joined the United States Army because I believed in something bigger than myself, she began. I believed service could be sacred, that wearing this uniform meant something more than just rank or ribbons, that it meant protection, honor, truth. Her voice was steady, clear, but I also learned that uniforms don't make you invincible. Sometimes they make you a target, not because of what you've done, but because of what some people refuse to see. She paused. And on a cracked pavement in Riverton, Georgia, I was reminded that service alone doesn't guarantee dignity. A hush swept the crowd. No one looked away. But dignity, she said firmly, is not something to be begged for. It's not granted by position or permission. It is inherent. And the moment we allow anyone to forget that, especially those in power, we dishonor the flag we claim to protect. Murmurs of agreement. Some choked back tears. They tried to silence me. They failed, not because I shouted louder, but because I never stopped telling the truth. The Respect Act now exists because of you, the soldiers, the civilians, the silent watchers who found their voice. This isn't my victory, it's our reckoning. She stepped from behind the podium and held up her hands, not clenched in fists, not raised in defiance, but open. I am stepping down today not because I am tired, but because I've carried this torch long enough. And now it's time to pass it on. She turned toward Captain Simone Kerr, who stood among the officers flanking the ceremony. Captain Kerr, you reminded me what courage looks like when it's young, unafraid, and unwilling to compromise. You'll take command of the Civil Military Task Force as my successor." Simone's eyes filled with tears, but she saluted with crisp confidence. "With honor, ma'am," she said, "and with everything you taught us." After the ceremony, Veronica stood alone for a moment as the crowd dispersed. Dozens had tried to reach her. Network executives, government advisors, even publishers. They all wanted the same thing: a book, a special, a legacy. But her legacy wasn't for sale. It was already written, in every policy changed, every officer trained, every young girl who looked in the mirror and finally saw herself in command. As she packed up her office, she paused at a final envelope resting on her desk. No return address. Inside, a photo. Her. Standing calmly beside her vehicle on that hot Georgia day. Her hands visible, her face unreadable, the cuffs moments away. On the back, someone had written, "They tried to define you by a moment. You redefine the moment for a generation." She closed the folder and left the photo behind, pinned to the corkboard for whoever would sit in this chair next. Weeks later, a national newsroom. A breaking story interrupted regular programming. Today marks 1 month since the Respect Act was signed into law. Already, over 400 complaints have been filed through the new Civil Military Oversight Portal. Several departments have launched investigations. Training protocols are shifting. And a movement once ignited by a single arrest is now reshaping the landscape of American justice. A reporter paused, and though General Veronica Hayes has officially retired, her words continue to echo. They rolled a clip from her final speech. "The uniform doesn't grant you worth, and it doesn't take it away either. Your worth was always there. The system just has to learn how to see it." Somewhere peaceful, Veronica's new chapter. She sat on the porch of a quiet cabin nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No meetings, no cameras, no battles, just the rhythm of wind through the trees and the distant sound of a radio playing a familiar broadcast. This week's Community Spotlight honors the legacy of General Veronica Hayes, a woman who didn't just serve her country, she changed it. She sipped her coffee, watched the sunrise, then smiled, because though the battle was over, the fight for dignity, the fight for justice, was never really hers alone. It belonged to all of us. When the cuffs tightened, they thought they'd broken her, but they didn't know who she was, not just a soldier. Not just a general, she was a mirror, and when they looked at her, the country finally saw itself. To anyone watching this, speak even when they try to silence you, because the truth doesn't tremble, it transforms. This story isn't just about Veronica Hayes. It's about every one of us who's ever been judged before we were heard. Share this story, because dignity is not negotiable.